is Matthias for mamoworld.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you
Yeah, hello everybody and welcome to this new tutorial for mamoworld.com. My name is Matthias Möhl, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you composite the robot arm in the video you've just seen. The tutorial consists of 3 steps. In the first step we are going to track our shot in Mocha. The tracking we are going to do there is a little bit advanced, and I think that also people that already have tracked in Mocha can learn here something. In particular, I show you how to track 2 different kinds of motion. So it seems that the motion of this arm is just one motion, but actually we need to distinguish the kind of motion that the skin of my arm here performs and the motion of the bone behind it. And I show you how you can track both of these motions independently in Mocha. In the second step, we are going to create the wound in After Effects. Actually, the wound itself is not created in After Effects, since it is just makeup. So if you don't know how to do such kind of makeup, or if you want to fake everything in your computer, then you can find another tutorial of me that shows how to compose such a wound onto the arm. But in this case, we just use the readily done wound, and I just focus on how to cut this hole inside the wound, and this is what we are going to do in step 2. So for this we are going to create an undistorted pre-comp, and this is a feature that was earlier available in MochaImport only in combination with the Red Giant Warp plugin, but now it is also without it possible, and I show how to do this here. And then I'm going to show you how to fake some dripping blood into this undistorted pre-comp. During this process we will also note some perspective problems, and I show you a nice way how to fix it. Finally, in the third step we are going to composite the bones behind our wound. In order to do that, you will first learn why it was necessary in the first step to track the movement for the bones and the skin differently. Then you will learn how to use transform data to move the bones appropriately. Finally, the necessary color correction and other adjustments are shown. But now let's start with part 1 and tracking in Mocha. Okay, so here we are now in Mocha for After Effects version 1, which is a version included in After Effects CS4, but you can also do this with any other version of Mocha. I'm going to click here, and here to create a new project. We select this wound close file here, click next, and here also everything is okay, just click next. And here usually you have to change the frame rate, so this is something not detected by Mocha correctly usually, so 25 frames per second in my case, and click finish. And now here we have our footage, and you can see that the wound is actually already on the arm. So the wound itself is not something we are going to fake in After Effects, but this is actually makeup. So it's already done while I was filming this. And so this is always a good idea to get good results, that you don't try to fake everything in post, but try to combine real elements with ones that you're going to fix in post to get the best results. So maybe I'm going to give also a quick, I guess I'll do some making of material that you can see how to paint such wounds here. But anyway, so now it's about tracking this. And this track is actually quite interesting, because we are going to do 2 separate tracks. One for cutting the hole here inside of this wound, and the second one for compositing the bone, this metal bone behind it. And the main idea why we need 2 tracks is that there is quite some motion going on that only affects the skin. If you can see here, I use my hand to really move the skin around. Here a lot of movement of the skin that should not affect the bone, because if you think of a bone or a metal bone being behind this, it should not be moved when I move the skin here like this. Okay, so we are going to do two tracks, one that is capturing all the complex movement of this skin here, and the second one that just represents the more simple movement of just the bone. So let's start with the first part. We are going to draw here a mask roughly around this wound. Right click to finish. Maybe I correct this point here. So it doesn't need to be precise, very nice. And I enable here all possibilities for motion, because yeah, this motion is quite complex and it has some shear and perspective motion in it. So we want it to be as precise as possible, so all kinds of motion are there. And now I click here on track forward. Okay, so now this track is finished, and we're going to rename the respective layer to skin. Then we are going to set the surface, because select the layer and now the surface. The surface represents the part that we later want to modify, or actually want to have a stabilized, undistorted pre-comp of. And so just think of fitting a plane to this area that we want to work here on as good as possible. Maybe like this. And now we export this thing here as corner pin data. Yeah, this is why we need to set this blue rectangle here, because this is the area, the corner pin area that we later want to work with. And the idea is that later we get a stabilized view on exactly this part that we want to modify. So corner pin data. So here we now save it as skin.txt. Click on save. And now we want to do the second part of the track. And the second part is the track of the bone, where we do not want to have the movement of this skin here. So let me go back to the first frame. And what we do now is we draw a shape around this part here. Right click to finish. And now with this button here, we draw an additional one. Again, right click to finish, and maybe let me enlarge this here a little bit. We draw a second area around this part here, and we can disable our surface here and also disable here shear and perspective motion, because we don't want to have this. So the idea is like a 2-point track. Yeah, we track something in this area and something in this area, and what we will get is mainly the movement of these two areas combined. Yeah, but without all the movement here in the middle that we really do not want to have, that just means movement of my skin. Yeah, if something moves here and here, then it's really the bone that is moving. If something is just moving here and not in this and this part, it's just the skin, and we want to ignore this. So make sure to disable shear and perspective here, because we do not want to have corner pin but transform data later, where this would not help us. And now click here on track forward. You can see now here that also this thumb entered the tracking area, but actually it doesn't matter much. Yeah, it nevertheless made a quite good track, so no problem at all. Very robust tracking possible here. We rename this layer now to bone. And here we do not need to set a surface, since we are just going to export transform data. So click on export data, choose here transform data, save, and now we call this bone.txt save. So, and that's it for the tracking part. So now let's see what we need to do in After Effects. Okay, so here we are now in After Effects, and I already have imported the footage that we need, in particular here our video file, and I drag it into a new composition. So we have it now right here. And the next thing I'm going to do is to load our tracking data. And actually before I do it, let's call this here background, and I Control D to duplicate it, and I call this here then wound. And on this wound layer, I apply MochaImport. So just a duplicate of our background. I load tracking data from a text file, and the one I choose is of course the skin that we tracked before. So Mocha informs me that it's tracked 90 keyframes of corner pin data, and everything is okay. So I can leave it as it is. And here we choose the Create Undistorted and Stabilized Pre-comp option. Okay, so this is going to create a pre-comp of only the corner pinned area that we then can work on. If you have the Red Giant Warp plugin installed, you can instead also choose this one here, Red Giant Warp, Create Undistorted and Stabilized Pre-comp. It's doing essentially the same, but with Red Giant Warp, which means you have motion blur and some other nice features and maybe a little bit better quality. I'm going to show it now here without Red Giant Warp. So just choose this option and click on Apply. This takes a short moment. And now we have here our corner pin. You can see the 4 corners of it. And except for this, it seems that nothing changed. But what we have now here is a nice pre-comp that we can now enter by double-clicking on it. And now in this pre-comp, you see we have our wound nicely stabilized. So everything is moving around it, but the wound itself is nicely stabilized, and now we can work in this perspective to cut basically a hole into the wound. What we do for this is add a new solid and call it matte, and disable its visibility, and we draw a mask. I have enabled here Roto Bezier, which makes this a little bit simpler. And now we just go here along the border of our wound. Like this. And then I set the mode of this to stencil alpha, which means like cut this out or only leave the things here in between from the layers behind it. And the next thing we can do is to create a background, layer new solid and call it background and leave it also black, put it here. And if we now go back to our main comp, oops, sorry, we have to make it visible again. And now you see that basically this stencil alpha mode here has cut out everything. So everything outside of this layer became transparent. Yeah. So here you can see now we've nicely cut a hole into our wound. Maybe here the wound does not look so nice, so we can, let me deactivate this here temporarily, and this here too. Maybe we can correct it a little bit, make it look a little bit more interesting. Maybe like this. Yeah. Activate it again. Okay, and you can see that it nicely moves and also deforms with the track. So here you see when I move the skin, everything morphs somehow accordingly, since our track here morphs accordingly. Very nice and very simple with this MochaImport trick. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to have this flash somehow here, or this border should have a rough edge. Yeah, what we do therefore do is we again create a new layer here that I just duplicated the background. You can create any kind of solid here, doesn't matter. And let's call this skin border. And we like to fill it. So And this border, I temporarily, again, make this here visible. The border should have the color of the blood here. So just pick somehow average color in here of the blood. I disable this again. And now what we do is we take our matte layer, duplicate it also, and call this here skin matte. So just the matte for the skin. And in this duplicate, we choose the mask, click Ctrl A to select all points of the mask, and move it a little bit down like this. And in this duplicate, then we set this mode here to normal. And now from the skin border itself, we set the track matte to alpha matte, or sorry, alpha inverted matte. This means from our skin border, only such a part remains, and the rest is removed by the track matte above it. Okay, the skin border, let's make it a little bit more interesting by adding some fractal noise. Fractal noise here, drag it onto our skin border and set its blending mode to overlay. Now it looks a little bit more interesting, and what we now need is some rough edge on it. And what we therefore do is we go to the matte of it, to the skin matte, and choose the roughen edges effect. Like this. And what we choose here is a cut, and we make the border here very large. And I disable this here for a moment, and you can see that if I increase the border, I get here a rougher and rougher edge. Maybe something around this is okay. And then we need to stretch it into a certain direction. You see, if I stretch it positively, it gets stretched like this, and I stretch it negative, like maybe -5, to have the blood going down like this. And we can increase the complexity. So this looks already quite nice. Maybe a little bit less edge sharpness, like this. So this looks pretty convincing. And then we want this blood to animate over time. So we go to evolution and set it here a keyframe. And we go to the end and increase this here a little. Like you can see now the blood starts animating. Maybe like this. Now we have here nicely dripping blood. Like this. Maybe we can increase the border a little bit. Or can do something about the scale. Yeah, you can play around with it until you have something nice. I don't like here now that you have here such a large part without blood. So you can also change this by just choosing some offset. So just move it until you have something that looks interesting. So maybe like this. This looks quite nice. Okay, now we actually made a mistake, and I made it by intention to show you a problem. And the problem is, if we now go to our main comp, the blood does not look convincing because it goes into this direction and not downwards as you would expect it. Yeah. So it goes, although here in the pre-comp it nicely goes downwards and looks as if it would drip here. This is not really here the case, and the problem is that we've chosen our area here that we corner pinned not appropriately for this purpose. So you can see that the downwards direction, so these lines here basically of our pre-comp are not going downwards into our main comp. So what we do to change this is, we have to redo parts here. I go back to Mocha, and here this blue area we set differently, namely such that these lines really go vertical, and this makes then our blood drop correctly. So maybe like this. And then we go to export tracking data again. Make sure that you have corner pin data. If you have a newer version of Mocha, choose the one that is, choose the corner pin data that is compatible with Red Giant Warp and MochaImport. You have several options there. Here you have just this one corner pin. Save, and then let's call it skin vertical. Save, and we go back to After Effects, go here to our project and to the main comp, and do another duplicate of the background and call this wound new. Actually, you can delete here the old one, and now for the new wound, we again choose MochaImport, load now this skin vertical text. Everything's okay here. And again, we create an undistorted and stabilized pre-comp with our wound new selected. We get now our pre-comp. We go into the pre-comp. Let's quickly do everything again. New solid, call this matte. Disables visibility. Draw a quick mask around it. Okay, very nice. Set it to stencil alpha. And now we can duplicate it a second time. Choose all mask points here. Move it a little bit down. And from this duplicate, we set the mode to normal. And we create another layer called skin border, like this, and set its track matte to alpha matte. Enable the visibility here. And finally, we can actually copy from the old one here the effects. So skin border has these. Click E to reveal the effects. Control C to copy. Go here to skin border, Control V to paste them in. And actually this is alpha inverted, right? And we had some background layer, so we can also copy the background, Control C, Control V in here. And we can also copy from this here the roughen edges effect from our skin matte to our skin matte. Control V to paste. And now with our different corner pin here, we again have basically the same. And now here you can see it is now dripping in the right direction, namely in the direction of these lines here. And it looks much more convenient. A problem that we have here is here also some red parts are growing upwards. And let's close this one here. And this upwards growing we can avoid if we enlarge this here a little bit, our mask. Now you see it disappears. Okay, like this. Now it looks pretty nice. So let's see what we have so far. Or let's just correct one further thing, and this is, you can see we have here a quite visible border between our layer and the rest. So this can easily be changed by going to our matte, hit MM to reveal the mask properties, and feather it a bit. So this looks quite nice. Maybe we even feather it a little bit more. Yep, this looks pretty convincing, so let's take a quick look at the result we have so far. Okay, one thing that does not yet look perfect here is this boring black background. And if you want to improve this background, a simple idea you could have is to say, okay, let's just update the background as a pre-comp, but this is not really the best idea because of the tracking. So actually the background should not have exactly the same movement as the foreground here. Nevertheless, I quickly show you that in order for you to see why it makes sense to have different tracks, okay? So here we have our background layer, and one thing we could do is apply a little ramp effect to it. Oops, that was wrong. Edit, undo. So the ramp here to the background. And then let's choose here some skin-like color. And here's some darker variant of it, like this. And then we can maybe like this, just get some interesting gradient, and then we add also some fractal noise. Fractal noise, drag it also here on the background, and set for this fractal noise the blending mode to overlay. So now we have here some interesting background. Maybe we could have here the skin itself, skin border a little bit darker, like this. Okay. And now if you look at it, it looks in a snapshot, it looks quite nice. But if you look at it in an animated way, you see that if the skin is moved, this background moves exactly with it. So it feels like the background is actually not behind at the other border of the arm, but it looks like it is covering here this area. Okay, so especially in the moments here where I move it like this, you wouldn't expect really the background to move that much with the skin here that is moving in the foreground. So you really need a different track for this. And so what we therefore use is our, let's start Mocha again. MochaImport. We therefore load our bone track. It loads everything correct. And without anything selected, we just go here to move selected layer on new null object. And without any layer selected, we hit apply. And now we have a new null object that moves according to our bone. Yeah, you can see it here. And what we now do is we copy the background layer from here and paste it here. And then we should rotate it, or let's first set its transparency to something lower, that we can see where we need it to be. Then we click position, shift scale, so we scale it down, shift rotation, and we can bring it here in how we like. So the next thing we need is it should move with our arm. Yeah, currently it's not moving. So we have here our null object, so let's put this in front of it. And the easiest thing we can do is just parent it to it. Parent it to our null. And now the background moves with our arm, but if you see closely here now the movement of the skin, when I move my arm, so the background does not move with it. And that makes it look much more realistic. What we need now is a possibility to cut out this background correctly. What we do for this is we have here our wound pre-comp and we duplicate it. So wound new pre-comp, Control D to duplicate it and call it wound matte. And let's quickly open this wound matte. And what we're going to do is we remove here everything, every layer, except for the two matte layers. And I make this skin matte visible, and that's already it. So there is not more than this to change. And now here everything is black. That should later be transparent. Okay, so we go to wound close again and drag this wound matte in before our background, and now set this here to alpha matte. And now you can see that actually something weird is happening here. Right. So you see that you cannot really just apply here this layer directly, but what you need in addition is, if you go to our wound pre-comp, there is some effect on it, some power pin effect. So we got just go Control C and go here, Control V, and now you can see that it moves appropriately. So the corner pin effect on the duplicate here is of course also necessary. And if you now see this, you can see that it looks much more realistic than having the background in the pre-comp. So let's directly compare this. So this here was the background in the pre-comp, and you can see that it really exactly moves with the skin. And now this here is the other background that does not move with the skin, but there is some parallax effect between the two, so it looks much better. So here again, background in the pre-comp, and here background in the main comp looks much better. Okay, maybe this is a good point to clean up a little. So we create a new folder, pre-comps, and move all our pre-comps inside of this. And now the only thing that remains is the composition of the bones. And I already have two pictures here of the bone parts imported. If you wonder what they are, you can see this is the first image and this one is the second. So if you don't have any robot arm bone parts in your house, you might need to get a little creative. What I did in my case is that I took a picture of this lamp here. You can see here, this gives a nice part of the bone. And with the second part, you might have already guessed what this is. Well, this is a hose of my shower. So such pictures you can get by just thinking a little bit of it, being creative, and come up with some nice ideas, or you just use the pictures I used and I took here. But really, it's not always necessary to look at the internet for nice pictures. Sometimes you can easily make some yourself. Okay, so here I have these two pictures, and I just take them and drag them into the new composition, and they are quite large, as you can see here. So I scale them down, maybe like this here. Where is the other one? Ah, it's here behind. Okay, so now let's fit them in separately. So I hit here R for rotation and P for position. And first let's rotate them. This we can do both of them together. Scale them up again a little bit. And now the rest I like to do for both of them separately. So let's just look at this one here first. This one here first. I bring it in like this or so, and then I can parent it to our move null, such that it moves according to our arm nicely. And then or maybe the next thing we should do is to add here our mat. So copy this mat layer and paste it, move it on top of our bone 1, and set the track mat to alpha. Now it is here nicely hidden behind the skin. And I also want to animate the position of it. From here, let's say, let's move it a little bit. At the beginning it doesn't move at all. Then we have some movement So the movement is difficult to animate actually in this way, so it's easier if we enable the 3D switch. And now we can just drag on this axis and move it a little bit in this direction. Then we go back and drag it again back a little bit, like this. Okay. Looks nice. And now we also do the same thing basically for the second bone here. So we duplicate the mat, drag it in front of the second bone, make the second bone visible, and set its track mat to alpha matte. And actually the second bone should be in front of the first one. So let's move it here. I like it to be a little bit larger, so we increase its scale. We can also make it 3D and drag it a little bit here, and maybe like this. And also, of course, we need to parent it to our null, like this. Okay. Looks quite nice. Maybe a little bit up, like this. And what now can be done in addition is some color corrections, so they are much too light or too not dark enough. So I add some color correction effect, color correction levels. And what I want to do is actually to make this here much darker and bring this here also down, maybe like this. Okay, so this looks good, and we then can directly copy this levels effect, Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, to this second part. So let's take a quick look at this. Okay, so this looks now really good, and I think I would consider it as finished. Maybe you want still to add some more color correction and make the background darker, but I am going to leave this to you. Also, I now just showed one of the two shots, and the second one you can actually apply exactly the same technique to, so nothing more to show. Once again, this is Matthias for mamoworld.com, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.